In July 1995, Sarah Collins finished her shift at the Pineridge Diner off Highway 26 in Seaside, Oregon. At 11:30 p.m., she called her husband, promising to pick up breakfast ingredients for their daughter's birthday. By morning, the diner's lights remained on, the register untouched. Sarah was found in the walk-in freezer, stabbed 23 times, her silver locket still around her neck. The case quickly went cold until 2021, when a discarded coffee cup and advanced DNA technology unveiled a killer hiding in plain sight for 26 years. Before diving into this harrowing story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest true crime investigations. Seaside, Oregon in 1995 was a picturesque coastal town where salt-laden air mingled with the scent of pines. Tourists flocked to its sandy shores during summer, but by autumn, the community returned to its quiet rhythm of fishing boats, lumber mills, and the steady hum of Highway 26 connecting the coast to Portland. In this peaceful setting, the Pineridge Diner stood as a beacon for travelers and locals alike, its neon sign casting a warm glow against the foggy Pacific nights. Sarah Collins, 34, was known throughout Seaside for her infectious laugh and unfailing kindness. A mother of two, Emma, 7, and Jason, 10, she worked the night shift at the diner to help support her family while her husband Michael taught high school during the day. Their tag-team parenting ensured one of them was always home with the children, a system that worked for their modest but happy life in a blue clapboard house 3 blocks from the ocean. Everyone who knew Sarah described her as the heart of the community. She remembered regular customers' orders before they sat down, offered free coffee to truck drivers caught in coastal storms, and kept a jar by the register collecting change for local families in need. Her manager often said Sarah wasn't just a waitress, she was the reason people chose Pineridge over the newer establishments popping up along the highway. The night of July 23, 1995, began like any other. Sarah kissed her children goodnight as Michael prepared to take over the evening routine. She slipped on her pale blue uniform dress, pulled her auburn hair into a neat ponytail, and drove her weathered Chevy Nova to the diner for the 4 p.m. to midnight shift. Security footage later recovered showed a typical evening. The dinner rush came and went. Highway travelers stopped for coffee and pie. By 11 p.m., only a few tables remained occupied, a couple of fishermen discussing the next day's tide, a family with a sleeping toddler finishing their meal, and a solitary man in a dark jacket sitting at the far end of the counter, nursing a cup of coffee. At 11:30 p.m., Sarah called home. The diner's landline recorded a 3-minute conversation with Michael, her voice cheerful as she promised to pick up eggs and flour for Emma's birthday pancakes the next morning. "Love you," she said before hanging up. "See you soon." Neither she nor Michael knew these would be her last words to her family. The final customer left at 11:45 p.m., according to the register receipts. Sarah began her closing routine, wiping down tables, refilling sugar containers, and counting the day's earnings. The security camera captured her moving efficiently, occasionally glancing at her watch, likely eager to get home. At 11:58 p.m., the footage showed Sarah looking up suddenly, her expression changing from concentration to surprise. She moved toward the back of the diner, beyond the camera's view. This was the last recorded image of Sarah Collins alive. Morning shift manager Deborah Wilson arrived at 5:45 a.m. to find the diner's lights still on. The front door was unlocked, the register drawer closed and full. Sarah's purse sat beneath the counter, her car keys still inside. The night's receipts were nearly organized beside the register, waiting to be deposited. "Sarah?" Deborah called, moving through the silent diner. When no answer came, she checked the office, the bathrooms, even the parking lot where Sarah's Nova still waited in the employee space. It wasn't until Deborah opened the walk-in freezer that the morning's quiet shattered. Sarah lay face down on the stainless steel floor, surrounded by a pool of frozen blood. A kitchen towel partially covered her body, as if someone had made a half-hearted attempt to conceal her. The metallic scent of blood mingled with the freezer's cold, creating an atmosphere of horror that Deborah would later say haunted my dreams for years. Deborah's scream brought the early morning cook running. One look at the scene sent him stumbling back to the phone to call 911. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Seaside Police Department responded within minutes. Officer James Martinez, first on the scene, secured the perimeter with yellow tape, ordering the small gathering of curious onlookers to step back. Within the hour, the modest diner transformed into a hub of investigative activity. Detectives in pressed shirts and ties moved methodically through the space, their voices hushed but urgent. The Clatsop County forensic team arrived shortly after, led by technician Laura Simmons. Her team photographed every inch of the scene, the body, the freezer floor, the spatter patterns on the metal shelving, and the partial bloody footprints leading to the back exit. Each image captured a fragment of the night's violent events, pieces of a puzzle that would take decades to complete. "This is no robbery," Detective Ryan Harrison stated as he surveyed the scene. The register remained untouched, with $732 inside. Sarah's silver locket, a wedding anniversary gift from Michael, still hung around her neck. Her wedding ring remained on her finger. Nothing of value appeared to be missing. The forensic examination revealed a brutal attack. Sarah had been stabbed 23 times, primarily in the chest and abdomen. Several wounds indicated defensive injuries on her forearms and hands, suggesting she had fought desperately against her attacker. Blood spatter analysis showed she had been standing when the attack began, before collapsing near the freezer's back wall. Most intriguing to investigators was the weapon, or rather, its absence. Based on the wound patterns, the medical examiner determined Sarah had been stabbed with a narrow, double-edged blade, possibly a hunting knife. Yet no weapon was found at the scene. A thorough search of the diner, the surrounding parking lot, and even the nearby drainage ditches yielded nothing. However, other evidence proved more promising. A partial bloody handprint marked the freezer door, too smudged for fingerprint analysis but clear enough to suggest the killer had been injured during the attack. Several dark blue fabric fibers, not matching Sarah's uniform, were recovered from beneath her fingernails. And most significantly, drops of blood not belonging to Sarah were found on the kitchen towel partially covering her body and on the freezer's door handle. The killer was injured, Simmons reported. Sarah fought back, and she might have cut him in the struggle. These blood samples could be our key to finding who did this. The samples were carefully collected, labeled, and sent to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab in Portland. In 1995, DNA testing was still developing, but blood typing and enzyme analysis could potentially narrow down suspects if they had a sample to compare it against. While the forensic team processed physical evidence, detectives began the critical task of reconstructing Sarah's final hours. The security footage, grainy and limited to the main dining area, showed the last customer, a man in a dark jacket, leaving at 11:45 p.m. His face was never clearly visible to the camera, always angled away or obscured by the baseball cap he wore pulled low. Interviews with the evening's customers yielded little additional information. The fisherman remembered seeing the man in the dark jacket but couldn't describe his face beyond noting he had a beard. The family with the toddler hadn't noticed him at all. No one recalled any unusual interaction between him and Sarah. One potential witness emerged 2 days into the investigation. Truck driver Pete Lawson had stopped to use the diner's restroom around midnight but hadn't entered the main building. He reported seeing a dark-colored pickup truck speeding out of the back lot, its headlights off until it reached the highway. He couldn't identify the make or model in the darkness, much less see the driver, but the timing aligned perfectly with the estimated time of Sarah's death. By the end of the first week, the investigation had established a rough timeline. Sarah had been alone in the diner after 11:45 p.m. Someone, possibly the man in the dark jacket, possibly someone who entered after the security footage ended at midnight, had attacked her in the kitchen area. The struggle moved into the walk-in freezer, where Sarah received the fatal wounds. The killer then partially covered her body, possibly tried to clean up, and fled through the back exit sometime before 1 a.m. The community reacted with shock and fear. Seaside, with its population of just under 6,000, rarely saw violent crime beyond the occasional bar fight or domestic disturbance. A brutal murder at a familiar local establishment shattered the town's sense of security overnight. Michael Collins, devastated by the loss of his wife, appeared at a press conference 1 week after the murder. His face gaunt with grief, he stood with Emma and Jason clutching his hands on either side. "Sarah was everything to us," he said, his voice breaking. "She worked that shift so she could be with our children during the day, so she could help with homework and attend school events. Now our children have to grow up without their mother because someone took her from us. If anyone knows anything, please come forward. My children deserve justice for their mother." His plea generated dozens of tips, but most led nowhere. Several reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles near the diner that night. Others claimed to have spotted suspicious characters in the weeks before. One anonymous caller insisted the murder was connected to drug trafficking along Highway 26, though investigators found no evidence to support this theory. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The investigation's focus soon turned to those in Sarah's orbit. In such cases, statisticians knew, the perpetrator was often someone known to the victim. Detectives conducted exhaustive interviews with family members, co-workers, and regular customers. Michael Collins was initially considered, as spouses frequently are in homicide cases. However, his alibi proved solid. Neighbors confirmed seeing him at home with the children that evening, and phone records verified Sarah's call home at 11:30 p.m. Besides, the level of violence suggested a crime of rage or opportunity rather than a planned domestic murder. 3 potential suspects emerged during the early investigation. First was Victor Ramirez, a line cook who had been fired from the diner 3 months earlier after Sarah reported him for stealing from the register. Witnesses recalled Victor threatening her, saying she would regret crossing him. When questioned, Victor became visibly nervous, his answers contradictory. He claimed to be at a bar in Astoria during the time of the murder, though no one could definitively confirm his presence there after 11 p.m. The second person of interest was Ronald Kemp, a long-haul trucker with a history of violence against women. Ronald was a regular at the diner, often making inappropriate comments toward Sarah. 2 weeks before the murder, she had refused to serve him after he became belligerent, causing a scene that required the manager to intervene. Ronald's trucking logs showed he had been in the Seaside area the night of July 23, though he claimed to be sleeping in his cab at a rest stop 20 miles away. The third suspect was David Winters, a drifter who had been spotted sleeping behind the diner's dumpsters several times in the weeks before the murder. A dishwasher reported seeing David watching Sarah through the windows during her shifts, behavior that Sarah had mentioned finding unsettling. Police located David in a homeless encampment near Cannon Beach, his clothes dirty and his manner erratic. He denied any involvement in the murder but couldn't account for his whereabouts that night. All 3 men provided blood samples for comparison against the unknown blood from the crime scene. The results, however, yielded no matches. None of the 3 men could be tied directly to the attack through physical evidence. Detectives expanded their investigation, interviewing over 200 people connected to the diner or the highway corridor. They reviewed similar cases across the Pacific Northwest, looking for patterns that might indicate a serial offender. They checked prison release records, searching for violent offenders recently returned to the area. Every lead they pursued evaporated. Every potential suspect either had an alibi or didn't match the limited physical evidence. The unidentified blood samples and blue fibers remained the strongest clues, but without a match, they were merely evidence without context. As weeks stretched into months, the investigation gradually lost momentum. The initial team of 12 detectives dwindled to 4, then 2. Media coverage, once prominent, faded to occasional updates questioning why the killer remained at large. By the 1-year anniversary of Sarah's death, the case had effectively gone cold. In July 1996, the Collins family held a memorial at the diner, which had reopened under new management and a new name. Michael, Emma, and Jason placed flowers beneath a small plaque dedicated to Sarah. Local papers ran retrospective pieces with headlines like "1 year later, Seaside Diner murder remains unsolved and family still seeks justice for slain mother." For the detectives who had worked the case, Sarah Collins represented their most painful failure. The evidence boxes were eventually transferred to the department's cold case storage, the files carefully preserved but rarely reopened. The blood samples that had once seemed so promising were sealed and stored in the county evidence lockup, awaiting technology that didn't yet exist to reveal their secrets. Seaside tried to move forward, but the murder left an indelible mark on the community. Parents became more protective of their children. The Highway Diner, once a symbol of the town's welcoming nature, became associated with tragedy. Tourists passing through would sometimes ask locals about that murder at the diner, a question that inevitably drew tight-lipped responses and changed subjects. For Michael Collins and his children, time passed in a fog of grief and unanswered questions. Emma celebrated birthdays without her mother's pancakes. Jason graduated from middle school, then high school, with an empty seat where Sarah should have been cheering. Michael eventually returned to teaching, raising his children as a single father, but friends noted he never fully recovered from the loss. Each year on the anniversary of Sarah's death, the family would visit the site of the former diner, leaving flowers and renewing their plea for information. Each year, fewer media outlets covered the story. Each year, the case seemed to drift further from resolution. By 2000, the Seaside Police Department had officially classified the Sarah Collins murder as a cold case. The file, with its crime scene photos, witness statements, and forensic reports, was moved to long-term storage. The investigation that had once consumed the department's resources and the town's attention faded into a painful memory, a reminder of justice delayed and potentially denied. What no one could have anticipated was how dramatically forensic science would evolve in the coming decades, or how a discarded coffee cup would eventually break open a case that had remained frozen in time for over 25 years. As the new millennium dawned, the Sarah Collins case gathered dust in Clatsop County's evidence storage. The box of physical evidence, sealed blood samples, fiber evidence, and crime scene photos sat alongside hundreds of other unsolved cases, a silent testament to justice delayed. Meanwhile, the Collins family fought to keep Sarah's memory alive and her case in the public consciousness. Michael Collins, once a vibrant high school teacher known for his enthusiasm in the classroom, had aged dramatically in the years following his wife's murder. Though he continued teaching mathematics at Seaside High School, colleagues noted the perpetual sadness behind his eyes. He devoted his spare time to raising awareness about Sarah's case, creating a website chronicling the murder and posting regular updates even when there was nothing new to report. Emma and Jason Collins grew up in the shadow of their mother's unsolved murder. Jason, who had been 10 when Sarah died, graduated high school in 2003 and immediately joined the Portland Police Academy, driven by a desire to bring closure to cases like his mother's. Emma, more reserved in her grief, studied forensic science at Oregon State University, specializing in DNA analysis. Both children channeled their loss into careers dedicated to justice, a choice that made Michael both proud and sorrowful. No child should have to build their life around solving their parents' murder, he told the Oregonian during a 2005 interview marking the 10th anniversary of Sarah's death. But they're determined to prevent other families from experiencing what we went through. Each July 23, the Collins family held a memorial at what had once been the Pineridge Diner, now a local coffee shop called Coastal Brews. The owners, respectful of the location's history, allowed them to place flowers beneath the small bronze plaque commemorating Sarah. As the years passed, attendance at these memorials dwindled. What had once drawn hundreds of community members had, by the 15th anniversary, attracted barely 20 people. The town of Seaside itself had changed substantially. Tourism increased, bringing new development along the waterfront. Highway 26 was expanded to accommodate growing traffic between Portland and the coast. New residents moved in, many unaware of the tragedy that had once gripped the community. Life moved forward, as it inevitably does, leaving Sarah's case behind. Yet while public memory faded, scientific advancements continued at a remarkable pace. Between 1995 and 2010, DNA technology underwent a revolution. The Human Genome Project was completed. Rapid sequencing technologies emerged. The combined DNA index system, CODIS, expanded exponentially, creating a nationwide database of offender profiles. What had once been cutting edge became standard procedure, and new techniques developed that investigators in 1995 couldn't have imagined. In 2010, Detective Olivia Ramirez joined the Clatsop County Sheriff's Department after transferring from the Seattle Police Department. Young, ambitious, and trained in modern investigative techniques, Ramirez developed a passion for cold cases. During her orientation, she came across the Sarah Collins file and found herself captivated by the details. "This case has all the elements that modern forensics can crack," she told her supervisor after reviewing the evidence list. Preserved blood samples from the perpetrator, fiber evidence, and a crime scene that was meticulously documented. "We should revisit this." Her request to officially reopen the case was initially denied due to limited resources and other priorities. Undeterred, Ramirez began working on it during her off hours, reviewing old files and interviewing retired officers who had been part of the original investigation. One such officer, James Martinez, now operating a fishing charter business in Astoria, provided valuable context. "We knew the killer left blood at the scene," Martinez told Ramirez as they sat on his boat one evening in 2011. "But back then, DNA testing was limited. We could determine blood type and some enzymes, but without a suspect to compare against, it didn't help much. We submitted the samples to CODIS when it became available, but there was never a match." Martinez paused, looking out at the Columbia River. "What always bothered me was that someone in our community probably knew something. The level of violence suggested personal rage, not a random attack. But people either didn't recognize what they knew, or they were protecting someone." Ramirez nodded, understanding the frustration of a case that had all the ingredients for solution yet remained unsolved. By 2015, 20 years after Sarah's death, Ramirez had compiled enough new potential leads to officially petition for the case to be reopened. The department, faced with the symbolic milestone and persistent advocacy from the Collins family, finally agreed. The first step was to re-examine the physical evidence using modern techniques. The blood samples, carefully preserved in cold storage for 2 decades, were sent to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab, now equipped with technology exponentially more advanced than what existed in 1995. The results confirmed what the original investigators had known: the blood belonged to a male not in CODIS. However, the new analysis extracted a complete DNA profile, far more detailed than anything possible in the 1990s. This profile was uploaded to CODIS with the hope that the killer might have been arrested for another crime in the intervening years. Again, no matches were found. Whoever killed Sarah Collins has managed to avoid getting their DNA into the system for 20 years, Ramirez told the newly formed cold case team. Either they've never been arrested, or they committed this crime before routine DNA collection became standard. The investigation broadened, incorporating techniques unavailable to the original detectives. The team created a geographic profile based on crime scene characteristics, theorizing that the killer likely lived within 30 miles of Seaside in 1995. They combed through digital archives of local newspapers, looking for similar crimes along the Highway 26 corridor. They even engaged a forensic psychologist to develop a profile of the killer based on the crime scene's characteristics. "The level of violence indicates rage," the psychologist's report stated. 23 stab wounds is excessive, suggesting a personal connection or perceived wrong. The fact that nothing was stolen indicates this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. The partial covering of the body might suggest remorse after the act. "You're looking for someone who knew Sarah, possibly harbored romantic feelings toward her that were unreciprocated, and had difficulty controlling anger." This profile led the team to revisit the original suspects, tracking down where they had been in the 20 years since the murder. Victor Ramirez, the fired line cook, had moved to California shortly after being questioned in 1995. Records showed he had built a stable life there, working at a restaurant in San Diego, marrying, and raising 3 children. He had no criminal record beyond a single DUI in 2001. Ronald Kemp, the trucking driver with a history of aggression toward women, had died in 2008 from complications related to diabetes. His last years had been spent in a nursing home in Eastern Oregon, his trucking career ended by his deteriorating health. David Winters, the drifter seen watching Sarah, proved hardest to track down. He had disappeared from the Seaside area shortly after being questioned and seen to vanish entirely. No death certificate, no tax records, no social security activity. It was as if he had walked into the forest and never emerged. Winters remains our most promising lead, Ramirez told the team during a 2016 briefing. His disappearance immediately after questioning is suspicious. We need to find him or confirm his death. The search for Winters consumed months of investigation but ultimately proved fruitless. If he was still alive, he had completely disconnected from the system, a feat increasingly difficult in the digital age. Meanwhile, the Collins family watched the renewed investigation with cautious hope. Jason, now a detective himself with the Portland Police Bureau, offered his professional insights while struggling to maintain emotional distance. "The not knowing is what destroys you," he confided to Ramirez during one of their frequent calls. "I became a cop thinking I could solve Mom's case, but instead, I've learned how many families never get answers." Emma, working as a forensic scientist in the very lab processing evidence from her mother's case, faced her own emotional challenges. She had recused herself from directly handling the evidence but stayed informed through colleagues. "Every day I analyze DNA from crime scenes," she told Ramirez. "Every day I help bring closure to families. But my own mother's killer remains unknown. The irony isn't lost on me." Michael, now nearing retirement from teaching, had never remarried. The website he maintained about Sarah's case had grown into a platform for families of victims of unsolved crimes across Oregon. He had become an advocate for cold case funding, testifying before state legislators about the importance of not forgetting victims as years passed. In 2018, a significant breakthrough in forensic science emerged that would transform cold case investigations nationwide: genetic genealogy. This technique, which had identified the Golden State Killer after decades of searching, combined DNA analysis with genealogical research to identify suspects through their distant relatives' DNA. When Detective Ramirez learned about this new method, she immediately recognized its potential for the Collins case. However, implementing it presented challenges. The technique required specialized expertise and substantial resources that the small coastal department didn't have. Undeterred, Ramirez applied for a federal grant specifically designed to help smaller agencies utilize advanced forensic techniques. In early 2019, the department received $75,000 earmarked for cold case resolution. A significant portion was allocated to the Collins investigation. With funding secured, the blood samples from the freezer door and kitchen towel were sent to a private laboratory specializing in genetic genealogy. Technicians extracted the DNA, sequenced it using the latest methods, and uploaded the genetic profile to public databases where people voluntarily share their DNA for ancestry research. The initial results came back in September 2019. The killer's DNA showed distant matches, third and fourth cousins, to several individuals who had submitted their DNA to trace their family history. None were close enough to immediately identify the perpetrator, but they provided the first real thread to follow in 24 years. Genetic genealogist Elaine Warren joined the investigation, tasked with building a family tree from these distant connections. Working backward from the DNA matches, she constructed an intricate web of relationships spanning generations. "It's like solving a puzzle where half the pieces are missing," Warren explained to the team. "We start with these distant relatives and work backward to find their common ancestors. Then we work forward, identifying all descendants. Somewhere in that tree is our killer." The process was painstaking. Warren sifted through birth certificates, marriage licenses, death records, newspaper archives, and social media profiles. She mapped migrations, tracked name changes, and documented family splits and mergers. Month by month, the tree grew more complete. By February 2020, Warren had narrowed the search to a specific branch of a family with deep roots in the Pacific Northwest. The ancestors had settled near Astoria in the late 1800s, with descendants spreading throughout Oregon and Washington over subsequent generations. Based on the DNA profile, age considerations, and geographic proximity to Seaside in 1995, I've identified 3 potential suspects, Warren reported. All male, all with connections to Clatsop County during the relevant time period, all with no DNA in Cody's. The 3 names were Thomas Reeves, 57, currently living in Portland, Brian Reeves, 61, residing in Eugene, and Peter Reeves, 54, still in Seaside. Brothers, all within the right age range to have committed the crime 25 years earlier. The Reeves brothers, Detective Ramirez murmured, reviewing their information. None had significant criminal records, a few minor offenses, but nothing violent, nothing that would have triggered a Cody's match. All 3 had lived within 30 miles of Seaside in 1995. Most intriguing was Peter Reeves. Records showed he had worked as a delivery driver for a local bakery in 1995, with a route that regularly included the Pineridge Diner. He would have known Sarah Collins, at least casually, as part of his job. We need to get DNA from all 3 brothers to confirm which one matches our crime scene sample, Ramirez told the team. But we need to be discreet. If they get wind of the investigation, they might flee. The team developed a surveillance plan for each brother, watching their routines and looking for opportunities to collect discarded DNA samples, cigarette butts, coffee cups, anything that might contain saliva or skin cells. Brian Reeves in Eugene was eliminated first. A heavy smoker, he regularly discarded cigarette butts outside his workplace. One was collected by an undercover officer and sent for expedited analysis. The DNA didn't match the crime scene sample. Thomas Reeves in Portland proved more challenging. He worked from home as a graphic designer, rarely leaving his apartment or discarding anything in public. After weeks of surveillance, officers finally collected a soda can he had disposed of at a local park. Analysis confirmed he was not the source of the crime scene blood. That left Peter Reeves in Seaside, the brother who had delivered to the diner, who still lived just miles from where Sarah Collins had been murdered. Initial surveillance revealed a man who kept to himself. Now working as a maintenance supervisor for a beachfront hotel, Peter lived in a small house on the outskirts of town. Divorced twice, he had no children and few apparent friends. For 3 weeks, officers watched Peter's movements, noting his routines. Each morning, he stopped at Coastal Brews, the very coffee shop that had once been the Pineridge Diner, before heading to work. The irony wasn't lost on the investigators. For years, the killer had been buying coffee at the site of his crime, perhaps even attending the annual memorials without anyone recognizing him. On April 15, 2020, an undercover officer entered Coastal Brews and observed Peter ordering his usual black coffee. When Peter left, abandoning his empty cup on an outdoor table, the officer casually collected it in a paper bag. The cup was immediately sealed and transported to the lab, where Emma Collins unknowingly processed evidence that might finally identify her mother's killer. The wait for results felt eternal to the investigation team. Ramirez found herself checking her email hourly, jumping whenever her phone rang. After 25 years, they were potentially hours away from answering the question that had haunted Seaside for a generation. The call came 3 days later. The lab director's voice was steady but tinged with emotion. "We have a match," she said. "The DNA from Peter Reeves' coffee cup is identical to the blood found at Sarah Collins' murder scene. The probability of a random match is less than 1 in 1 trillion. A stunned silence fell over the room as Ramirez processed the information. After a quarter century, they had a name. They had evidence. They had the man who had stabbed Sarah Collins 23 times and walked free for 25 years. "Thank you," Ramirez finally said. "Please send the formal report immediately. We'll be making an arrest today." Before proceeding, Ramirez made one crucial call, to Michael Collins. She couldn't tell Jason or Emma directly due to their professional roles in law enforcement and forensics, but their father deserved to know first. "Mr. Collins," she said when he answered. "This is Detective Ramirez. I need you to sit down." The silence on the other end was palpable. "We've identified Sarah's killer," Ramirez continued, her voice gentle but firm. "DNA evidence has given us a definitive match. We're making an arrest today." Michael's sob was audible through the phone. 25 years of uncertainty, of wondering who had taken his wife and why, crystallized in that moment of revelation. "Who?" he finally managed to ask. "Who took her from us?" "A man named Peter Reeves," Ramirez explained. "He was a bakery delivery driver who serviced the diner in 1995. We believe Sarah knew him as a regular visitor to her workplace." "Peter Reeves," Michael repeated, as if testing how the name felt in his mouth. "I don't know him. I don't recognize the name." "That's not uncommon in cases like this," Ramirez assured him. "He was likely just a face Sarah saw regularly on her shifts, not someone she spoke about at home." After promising to keep Michael updated, Ramirez ended the call and turned to the arrest planning. Given the violent nature of the original crime and the high-profile nature of the case, they would take no chances. A full tactical team would execute the warrant. As the sun set on April 18, 2020, exactly 9,066 days after Sarah Collins was murdered, police vehicles converged silently on Peter Reeves' small house on the outskirts of Seaside. Officers in tactical gear took positions around the property while Detective Ramirez, bulletproof vest over her suit, approached the front door with the arrest warrant in hand. The moment had finally arrived. A killer who had walked free for 25 years was about to face justice. For Sarah Collins, for her family, and for a community that had never fully healed from the violence of that July night in 1995. The tactical team surrounded Peter Reeves' modest house as darkness fell. Officers with flashlights and weapons drawn secured the perimeter while Detective Ramirez approached the front door. The porch light flickered as she knocked firmly. "Peter Reeves," she called. "This is Detective Olivia Ramirez with the Clatsop County Sheriff's Department. We have a warrant for your arrest." Silence followed. Ramirez knocked again, louder. "Mr. Reeves, please open the door. We have the house surrounded." A shuffling sound came from inside. Seconds later, the door opened to reveal a man in his mid-50s, graying hair thinning at the temples, wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans. His expression registered confusion rather than fear. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice surprisingly steady as he surveyed the officers positioned around his property. "Peter Reeves, you're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Collins on July 23, 1995, Ramirez stated, her voice clear and firm. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." For a moment, Reeves didn't move. His face remained impassive, almost eerily calm. Then, without warning, his expression crumbled. His shoulders sagged as if a great weight had suddenly been placed upon them. 25 years, he whispered, so softly that Ramirez barely caught the words. "I knew this day would come eventually." Without resistance, he turned and placed his hands behind his back. As the handcuffs clicked into place, a collective breath seemed to release among the officers. The man who had eluded justice for a quarter century was finally in custody. The arrest made headlines across Oregon. "Breakthrough in decades OLD Seaside murder," the Portland Oregonian proclaimed. "DNA solves 25-year-old diner murder," read the Seaside Signal. Television crews descended on the small coastal town, setting up outside the courthouse and the site of the former Pineridge Diner. For residents who had lived in Seaside since 1995, the arrest brought a wave of conflicting emotions. Relief mixed with shock as the community learned the killer had been among them all along. Peter Reeves had attended community events, shopped at local stores, even participated in town festivals, all while carrying the secret of Sarah Collins' murder. Most stunned were those who had known him. Co-workers at the beachfront hotel described him as quiet and reliable. Neighbors called him unremarkable and polite. The owner of Coastal Brews, the coffee shop that had replaced the diner, recalled him as a regular customer who always ordered the same drink and rarely engaged in conversation. "He came in almost every morning for years," she told reporters, her expression haunted. "He sat in the very building where he killed that poor woman." How does someone live with that? The Collins family experienced the arrest as both vindication and reopen wound. Michael, now 64, appeared briefly before reporters outside his home, Jason and Emma flanking him protectively. "We've waited 25 years for this moment," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "Sarah deserved justice, and we never gave up hoping that someday, somehow, her killer would be found. We're grateful to the investigators who never stopped looking for answers, especially Detective Ramirez, who brought new determination to a case many had forgotten." Jason Collins, now a seasoned detective himself, took a leave of absence from the Portland Police Bureau to support his father during the proceedings. Emma temporarily stepped back from her work at the forensic lab, recognizing the emotional challenge of separating her professional expertise from her personal stake in the outcome. As the shock of the arrest settled, attention turned to the legal process ahead. Peter Reeves was held without bail, charged with first-degree murder. The evidence against him was formidable. The DNA match provided a statistical certainty that couldn't be explained away. But prosecutors needed to build a comprehensive case that would explain not just who had killed Sarah Collins, but why. The investigation intensified, focusing now on Reeves' movements and relationships in 1995. Detectives combed through employment records from the bakery where he had worked as a delivery driver. They confirmed his regular route had included the Pineridge Diner, where he would have encountered Sarah Collins during her shifts. Former co-workers remembered little about Reeves from that time. "He kept to himself," one recalled. "Did his job, didn't socialize much with the rest of us. I wouldn't have noticed if he had a crush on a waitress or anything like that." Bank records from 1995 showed Reeves had been in financial difficulty around the time of the murder, with several overdue loan payments. He had divorced his first wife just months before Sarah's death, losing his house in the settlement. These stressors, while not directly tied to the crime, helped prosecutors understand his state of mind. Most revealing were items found during the search of Reeves' home. In his bedroom closet, officers discovered a locked metal box. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a narrow hunting knife with a distinctive handle. Though cleaned, advanced forensic techniques detected microscopic blood residue in the handle's grooves. Analysis confirmed it contained DNA from both Reeves and Sarah Collins. "This is almost certainly the murder weapon," the forensic technician reported. The blade dimensions match the wounds described in the autopsy, and the blood evidence places it at the scene. Even more disturbing was a small notebook found in the same box. Within its pages, written in cramped handwriting, were entries dated around the time of the murder. "Saw her again today. She always smiles when I deliver the bread. Does she know what I'm thinking? She doesn't see me. To her, I'm just another delivery guy. She'll notice me someday. She rejected me today. Laughed when I asked her out. Said she was married, happy. As if that matters. She'll regret making me feel small." The final entry, dated July 24, 1995, the day after the murder, contained just 3 words: "What have I done?" For investigators, the notebook provided the motive that had eluded them for 25 years. Peter Reeves had developed an obsession with Sarah Collins, misinterpreting her professional friendliness as something more. When rejected, his fantasy shattered, he had responded with rage. With the evidence mounting, prosecutors prepared for what they anticipated would be a challenging trial. Despite the DNA match and the items found in Reeves' home, cases this old presented unique difficulties. Witnesses' memories had faded. Some had died. Physical evidence, while preserved, had degraded somewhat over time. However, their concerns about a protracted legal battle proved unfounded. In October 2020, 6 months after his arrest, Peter Reeves agreed to plead guilty in exchange for the prosecution not seeking the death penalty. The decision stunned both the legal team and the Collins family, who had prepared themselves for years of appeals and court appearances. On the morning of the plea hearing, the Clatsop County Courthouse overflowed with spectators. Journalists from national publications sat alongside local reporters. Community members who remembered the murder filled the back rows. In the front, Michael Collins sat with Jason and Emma, their faces solemn as they prepared to face their wife and mother's killer for the first time. When Peter Reeves entered, escorted by officers, a hush fell over the courtroom. He appeared older than his 54 years, his shoulders hunched, his movements hesitant. He did not look at the Collins family, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor as he took his place before the judge. "Peter Reeves, you are charged with murder in the first degree in the death of Sarah Collins on July 23, 1995, the judge stated. "How do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor," Reeves responded, his voice barely audible. "And are you entering this plea voluntarily, with full understanding of the charges against you and the consequences of your plea?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge then asked if Reeves wished to make a statement before sentencing. For a moment, it seemed he would decline. Then, slowly, he raised his head. For the first time, he looked directly at the Collins family. "I've lived with what I did every day for 25 years, he said, his voice steadier now. "Not a single day passed that I didn't think about Sarah Collins and the life I took. I've walked by her memorials. I've seen her family grieving. I've watched her children grow up without their mother." He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "Nothing I can say will bring her back or make sense of what I did. I was obsessed, rejected, angry. But that doesn't explain or excuse taking someone's life. I'm guilty. I've always been guilty. And I'm sorry, not just for what I did that night, but for every day I remained free while her family suffered." The courtroom remained silent as Reeves finished speaking. Michael Collins stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Jason's jaw clenched visibly. Emma wiped tears from her cheeks. The judge then invited victim impact statements. Michael Collins approached the podium first, unfolding a paper with visibly shaking hands. 25 years ago, you took my wife from me," he began, his voice gaining strength with each word. "You took my children's mother. You took a daughter, a sister, a friend. You took a woman who brought joy to everyone she met. And you did it because she turned down a date." Michael looked directly at Reeves, who had returned his gaze to the floor. "For 25 years, I've wondered who could have done this terrible thing. I've imagined a monster. But you're not a monster, are you? You're just a man who couldn't handle rejection. A man who valued his ego over someone else's life. That makes what you did even harder to understand." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I won't say I forgive you. I can't. But I'm grateful that you've finally admitted what you did. My children have spent their entire adult lives searching for justice for their mother. Today, they can finally stop searching." Jason spoke next, his professional demeanor as a detective temporarily set aside. "I became a police officer because of what you did," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "Every case I've worked, every criminal I've arrested, I've been thinking of my mother. Hoping that somehow, solving other families' tragedies would help fill the void in our own." Emma's statement was brief but powerful. "I was 7 years old when you killed my mother," she said. "I grew up learning about DNA evidence because I knew that someday, somehow, science would reveal who took her from us. Today, science has spoken. And so have you. The truth is finally out." After the statements concluded, the judge delivered the sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As Reeves was led away, the Collins family embraced, their tears a mixture of grief and relief. A chapter that had remained open for 25 years was finally closing. Outside the courthouse, Detective Ramirez addressed the waiting press. "Today's outcome represents what can happen when we refuse to give up on victims," she said. "Cold cases aren't just files in a cabinet. They're people whose stories deserve to be told, whose killers deserve to face justice, no matter how much time has passed." In the days following the sentencing, Seaside began a process of collective healing. The case had reopened old wounds but also provided long-awaited answers. The coffee shop that had once been the Pineridge Diner became a gathering place for community members to share memories of Sarah and reflect on the case that had shaped their town's identity for a generation. For the Collins family, the resolution brought complex emotions. The pain of Sarah's loss remained, but the burden of not knowing, the question that had haunted them for 25 years, had been lifted. "It's strange," Michael told a reporter a week after the sentencing. "For so long, finding Sarah's killer was our focus. Now that it's happened, we're learning how to live without that search defining us." Jason returned to his position with the Portland Police Bureau, bringing new insight to the cold cases he investigated. "I've seen firsthand how advances in forensic science can solve cases we once thought unsolvable," he explained. "Every cold case detective works with the knowledge that technology tomorrow might reveal what we can't see today." Emma continued her work in the forensic lab with renewed purpose. "Every sample I process could be someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's child," she said. "I know now more than ever how a single DNA profile can change lives and bring truth to light." The Sarah Collins case became a landmark in Oregon's criminal justice history, showcasing the potential of genetic genealogy to solve decades-old crimes. The state legislature, influenced in part by Michael Collins' advocacy, approved increased funding for cold case units and DNA analysis of preserved evidence. Nationally, the case joined others like the Golden State Killer in demonstrating how science was rewriting the rules for unsolved crimes. Investigators across the country began reviewing their own cold cases with fresh eyes, wondering what secrets might be unlocked with new technology. For criminals who had escaped justice, the message was clear: the passage of time no longer guaranteed anonymity. A discarded coffee cup, a distant cousin's ancestry test, or a preserved blood sample could connect them to crimes committed decades earlier. 1 year after Peter Reeves' sentencing, the Collins family held a different kind of memorial at Coastal Brews. Instead of the solemn gathering that had marked each anniversary of Sarah's death, they organized a celebration of resolution and remembrance. Community members shared stories about Sarah, her kindness to customers, her devotion to her children, her infectious laugh. Former coworkers recalled her ability to brighten even the most difficult shifts. Friends remembered her generosity and warmth. Michael, now officially retired from teaching, spoke about moving forward without forgetting. "Sarah will always be part of our family, part of this community," he said. "But today, we're not just remembering how she died. We're celebrating how she lived, and we're acknowledging the extraordinary effort it took to bring her case to justice." Jason and Emma stood with their father, now adults whose lives had been shaped by their mother's death but who had channeled their grief into helping others find answers. Detective Ramirez attended as a guest rather than an investigator, watching as the community celebrated a resolution she had helped bring about. "Cold cases are never truly cold," she reflected as the gathering concluded. "They're just waiting for the right combination of science, dedication, and timing to bring them back to life." As sunset painted the Pacific horizon in shades of gold and crimson, Michael Collins stood at the edge of the gathering, looking westward. The weight of 25 years of uncertainty had lifted, replaced by the different but more natural burden of grief resolved. Sarah was gone, but the question of who had taken her, the question that had defined so much of his life and his children's lives, had finally been answered. In that moment, he thought not of Peter Reeves or DNA evidence or courtroom proceedings, but of Sarah herself, her smile on their wedding day, her voice singing lullabies to their children, her hand in his as they walked along the shore. These were the memories that would carry forward now that justice had been served. Across Seaside, residents reflected on a community's journey from shock to uncertainty to resolution. The case had shown them the darkest possibilities of human behavior but also the remarkable persistence of those seeking truth. It had demonstrated how a single act of violence could ripple through decades, affecting countless lives, but also how the pursuit of justice, however delayed, could bring a measure of healing. For those involved in solving the case, from Detective Ramirez to the lab technicians to genealogist Elaine Warren, Sarah Collins represented both the pain of unsolved crimes and the promise that science and dedication could eventually uncover truth. Her case joined others in a growing collection of cold cases thawed by advances in DNA technology and the refusal to let victims be forgotten. As darkness fell over the Oregon coast, the lights of Coastal Brews, once the Pineridge Diner, once a crime scene, now a place of remembrance, glowed warmly. Inside, a small plaque commemorating Sarah Collins had been joined by a new one, this one reading, "Truth Finds a Way." Justice came in 2020 for Sarah Collins, 1961 to 1995. In police departments across the country, detectives looked at their own cold case files with renewed hope. In forensic labs, technicians processed samples with the knowledge that each might hold the key to solving a decades-old mystery. In courtrooms, prosecutors presented evidence that would have seemed like science fiction when the crimes were committed. And in homes where families still waited for answers about their own loved ones, the Sarah Collins case offered a powerful message: time passes, but truth endures. The wait may be long, the journey difficult, but resolution remains possible. Science advances, memories persist, and justice, even delayed by 25 years, can eventually arrive. For the Collins family, for the town of Seaside, and for all who had followed the case over its long journey from tragedy to resolution, this was the lasting legacy of Sarah Collins. Not just a victim of violence, but a catalyst for truth. Not just a cold case number, but a testament to the power of persistence. Not just a memory fading with time, but a reminder that some stories, however painful, deserve their ending. The impact of the Sarah Collins case extended far beyond Seaside, sparking national conversations about cold cases, advances in forensic science, and the evolving nature of criminal investigations. As the story faded from headlines, its legacy continued to influence law enforcement practices across the country. Peter Reeves' confession and sentencing brought closure to the Collins family, but for many others with similar unsolved cases, it ignited new hope. Within months of the resolution, cold case units in neighboring counties reported increased funding and renewed interest in decades-old investigations. The Oregon State Police created a specialized genetic genealogy division, dedicated to applying the technique that had identified Sarah's killer to other unsolved homicides. The Collins family's journey from victims to advocates exemplified how personal tragedy could transform into a force for positive change. Michael Collins, entering his retirement years, channeled his energy into establishing the Sarah Collins Foundation, a nonprofit organization supporting families of cold case victims and funding DNA testing for unsolved murders. For 25 years, I lived in limbo, Michael explained during the foundation's launch event in Portland. Not knowing who killed Sarah or why was a unique form of torture that thousands of families across this country endure every day. Our foundation aims to reduce that number, one case at a time. The foundation's first initiative provided grants to 5 small police departments across Oregon for genetic genealogy testing in their oldest unsolved homicides. Within the first year, 2 of these cases identified suspects, one deceased, one still alive and subsequently arrested. Michael appeared at press conferences for both announcements, standing beside other families experiencing the bittersweet relief he had come to know so well. Jason Collins continued his law enforcement career but transferred from general homicide investigations to the Portland Police Bureau's newly expanded cold case unit. His personal experience with his mother's case gave him unique insight and credibility when speaking with victims' families. When I tell families I understand the waiting, the not knowing, they recognize it's not just a professional platitude, Jason said during an interview marking the unit's first anniversary. I lived that reality for most of my life. Now I work to shorten that journey for others. His sister Emma took a different path. After years in the forensic lab, she accepted a position teaching forensic DNA analysis at Oregon State University, training the next generation of scientists. Her courses became among the most popular in the department, with students drawn by both the cutting-edge science and her personal connection to one of Oregon's most famous cold cases. In my first lecture each semester, I show students a timeline of DNA technology development alongside the timeline of my mother's case, Emma explained. They see how advances that didn't exist when she was killed eventually identified her murderer. It helps them understand that what they're learning isn't abstract, it's evolving science that brings real closure to real families. The ripple effects of the case extended to Seaside itself. The small coastal community, once haunted by an unsolved murder, now found itself referenced in criminology textbooks and true crime documentaries. Coastal Brews, the coffee shop on the site of the former diner, became an unofficial landmark. The owners, initially uncomfortable with the location's history, eventually embraced it, creating a small memorial corner with Sarah's photo and information about cold case advocacy. For Detective Olivia Ramirez, the resolution of the Collins case marked a turning point in her career. Her persistence in pursuing a case others had consigned to history earned her promotions and recognition within law enforcement circles. She became a sought-after speaker at conferences, sharing insights on reinvestigating cold cases with modern techniques. Cold cases require a different mindset, she often explained to fellow investigators. You're not just solving a crime, you're bridging time. You're connecting with investigators who worked decades before you, victims who can no longer speak, in a community that may have forgotten but never fully healed. Her work with the Collins case also led to a deeper understanding of how technological advances were changing the very nature of criminal investigations. DNA evidence that had once been too degraded or limited for identification could now yield complete profiles. Public genealogy databases offered pathways to identification that circumvented traditional law enforcement limitations. Digital archives made historical records more accessible than ever before. 20 years ago, Peter Reeves thought time was his ally, Ramirez noted during a criminology lecture at Portland State University. He believed that as years passed, his chances of being caught diminished. Today's criminals need to understand that the opposite is true. Time is now on the side of justice. Genetic genealogist Elaine Warren, whose painstaking work had constructed the family tree that led to Peter Reeves, found herself overwhelmed with requests from law enforcement agencies nationwide. The technique she had helped pioneer was being recognized as a revolutionary tool in solving what had previously been considered unsolvable cases. When I started in this field, many viewed genetic genealogy as primarily a hobby for people interested in their family history, Warren reflected during a panel discussion at a forensic science conference. Now it's proving to be one of the most powerful investigative tools developed in the past century. The Collins case was a tipping point in demonstrating its potential. The legal implications of the technique generated robust debate among privacy advocates, ethicists, and legal scholars. Using publicly available DNA databases to identify suspects raised questions about consent, privacy, and the boundaries of genetic information. Several states introduced legislation addressing these concerns, seeking to balance investigative needs with privacy protections. Peter Reeves himself became a subject of psychological study. Criminal psychologists examine his case as an example of how an otherwise unremarkable individual could commit a brutal crime and then return to seemingly normal life for decades. His journals, particularly the entries surrounding Sarah's murder, provided rare insight into the mindset of someone who had maintained a double life for a quarter century. The most chilling aspect of the Reeves case is its ordinariness, noted Dr. Melissa Chen, a forensic psychologist who published a paper analyzing his writings. He wasn't a serial killer. He had no significant criminal history. He was a man who became obsessed, was rejected, reacted with violence, and then spent 25 years living a quiet life while carrying the weight of his crime. It challenges our conception of what a murderer looks like. Reeves declined most interview requests but eventually agreed to speak with researchers studying long unsolved homicides. In a recorded session at the Oregon State Penitentiary, he offered a perspective few others could provide, that of someone who had committed murder and evaded capture for decades. "After I killed her, I was certain I would be caught immediately," he said, his voice hollow and distant. "When days passed, then weeks, then months without arrest, I began to believe I might get away with it. By the time years had passed, I almost convinced myself it hadn't happened, that it was a nightmare, not a memory." He described living in constant fear during the first year after the murder, jumping at every police siren, expecting officers at his door each morning. As time passed, that fear gradually transformed into a background anxiety that never fully disappeared but became manageable. "Every July 23rd, I would wake up thinking, this is the day they find me. I saw the newspaper articles about the anniversaries. Sometimes I would drive by the memorials. Part of me wanted to be caught, to end the pretending. Another part was terrified of facing what I had done." When asked why he had kept the murder weapon and journal, evidence that directly tied him to the crime, Reeves struggled to articulate a clear answer. "I couldn't let them go," he finally said. They were my confession, even if only to myself. Maybe I was punishing myself by keeping them close. Maybe I wanted to be caught eventually. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why I didn't destroy them. His eventual confession and guilty plea, he explained, came as a relief after decades of deception. When Detective Ramirez showed me the DNA results, I knew it was over. The strange thing was, I felt something like peace for the first time in 25 years. Living with what I had done was its own kind of prison. Now I'm where I belong. 3 years after Peter Reeves' sentencing, advances in genetic genealogy continued to accelerate. Cases that had gone cold for 30, 40, even 50 years were being solved at an unprecedented rate. Police departments that had once relegated their oldest cases to storage were now actively reviewing them, searching for preserved biological evidence that might yield DNA profiles. The Collins family marked this anniversary not with a memorial focused on Sarah's death, but with a celebration of the Foundation's achievements. In its first 3 years, the Sarah Collins Foundation had helped fund testing that resolved 17 cold cases across the Pacific Northwest. Families who had waited decades for answers were finally learning the truth about their loved ones' killers. During the event, held at a Portland community center, Michael Collins stood before a wall displaying photographs of victims whose cases had been solved with the Foundation's assistance. Each face represented not just a life lost to violence, but a family's long journey from uncertainty to resolution. When Sarah was killed, DNA testing was in its infancy, Michael told the gathered crowd, his voice strong despite his advancing years. If someone had told me then that a family tree and a coffee cup would eventually identify her killer, I might not have believed them. Today, we know better. We know that answers can come from the most unexpected places, even after decades of silence. Jason and Emma joined their father at the podium, the three of them now united not just by loss but by purpose. Jason spoke about the psychological impact of resolution on victims' families, drawing from both personal experience and professional observation. Solving a cold case doesn't erase the pain of loss, he explained. But it removes the particular burden of not knowing, the questions that haunt you, the scenarios you imagine, the faces of strangers that make you wonder, could that be the one? That burden lifts, and while grief remains, it becomes a more natural grief, unburdened by mystery. Emma addressed the scientific aspects, explaining to the audience how advances continued to expand the potential for cold case resolution. 10 years ago, we needed a relatively large, well-preserved DNA sample to generate a useful profile, she noted. Today, we can work with samples that are smaller, more degraded, and more challenging. The science improves constantly, which means cases that couldn't be solved last year might be solvable tomorrow. Among those in attendance was Detective Olivia Ramirez, now heading the expanded Clatsop County Cold Case Unit. The success of the Collins investigation had transformed her department's approach to unsolved cases, leading to additional resources and renewed efforts to address their backlog of mysteries. The Collins case changed how we think about cold cases, Ramirez said when invited to speak. It showed us that time doesn't have to be the enemy of justice. Every cold case in our files is a promise we've yet to fulfill, to victims, to families, to communities. And increasingly, we have the tools to keep those promises, regardless of how much time has passed. The event concluded with a ceremony honoring the families whose cases had been resolved through the Foundation's work. One by one, they came forward, parents, siblings, children, spouses, each carrying a candle representing their loved one. As they placed their candles on a central table, Michael Collins embraced each person, sharing a connection that transcended words. Among them was Elaine Warren, the genetic genealogist whose work had been crucial in identifying Peter Reeves. Now training others in her techniques, she had helped build a network of specialists dedicated to applying genetic genealogy to criminal investigations. What began with the Collins case has grown into a movement, Warren observed as the ceremony concluded. Across the country, investigators are reviewing their oldest cases with new eyes. Technologies that didn't exist when these crimes occurred are now bringing answers that once seemed impossible. For the Collins family, the Foundation's work represented Sarah's legacy transformed. The senseless violence that had taken her life had ultimately sparked changes that were bringing resolution to other families, turning personal tragedy into a force for healing. Sarah was always someone who helped others, Michael reflected as the event drew to a close. She remembered customers' names and stories. She collected change for families in need. She made people feel seen and valued. In a strange way, her case continues that legacy. Because of what happened to her, other victims are being remembered. Other families are finding answers. Other communities are healing. As the gathering dispersed, Emma lingered beside the wall of photographs, studying the faces of those whose cases had been solved. Each represented a story similar to her mother's, a life cut short by violence, a family left searching for answers, a community marked by loss. But each also represented a resolution that had once seemed unlikely, a truth uncovered despite the passage of years. When I was young, I used to fantasize about finding Mom's killer, she confided to Jason as he joined her. I imagined dramatically confronting them, demanding answers. But when it actually happened, when we finally knew it was Peter Reeves, it wasn't like that at all. Jason nodded, understanding exactly what his sister meant. It wasn't about him in the end. It was about Mom. About us. About having an answer, even if it couldn't change what happened. The siblings stood in comfortable silence, the weight of their shared experience both burden and bond. They had lived most of their lives in the shadow of unsolved murder, their childhood and adolescence marked by unanswered questions. Now, as adults, they had not only witnessed resolution in their own case but had helped create pathways to resolution for others. Outside the community center, the Oregon evening was settling into dusk. Across the state, in police departments and forensic labs, work continued on other cold cases. Files were being reviewed. Evidence was being tested. Family trees were being constructed from genetic fragments left at long-ago crime scenes. The Sarah Collins case had become more than the story of a waitress murdered in a coastal diner. It had become a symbol of how justice could transcend time, of how science could illuminate truth decades after conventional investigation had failed, of how a family's persistence could ultimately bring answers not just for themselves but for others walking the same difficult path. In Seaside, the town had largely returned to its rhythms of tourist seasons and quiet winters. New residents who moved in knew the Collins case only as local history, a story from the town's past rather than a present reality. But for those who had lived through it, who had known Sarah, who had feared an unidentified killer, who had watched the case go cold and then dramatically resolve, the impact remained profound. At Coastal Brews, the small memorial corner continued to attract visitors. Some were true crime enthusiasts, drawn by the case's notoriety. Others were families of cold case victims, seeking inspiration and hope from a story of resolution. Still others were locals, maintaining a connection to a community's shared history. The coffee shop's owner had expanded the memorial over time, adding newspaper clippings about genetic genealogy, information about the Sarah Collins Foundation, and resources for families of cold case victims. What had begun as a simple commemoration had evolved into an informal educational exhibit about cold case resolution and the evolving science of DNA investigation. As the sun set over the Pacific, casting long shadows across Seaside's beaches, the town settled into another peaceful evening. In homes throughout the community, residents went about their routines, many no longer conscious of how the Collins case had once disrupted their sense of security. Time had healed much, though not everything. In Portland, Michael Collins returned to his home after the foundation event, tired but fulfilled. At 67, he had lived longer without Sarah than with her, a reality that sometimes struck him with sudden poignancy. He had built a meaningful life in her absence, raising their children, continuing his teaching career, eventually finding purpose in advocacy. But he had never forgotten the young woman whose laugh had first caught his attention at a community dance in 1979, whose kindness had defined their years together, whose absence had shaped everything that followed. On his bedside table sat two photographs, one of Sarah in her 20s, smiling broadly at the camera, another of Jason and Emma as adults, standing together at Emma's university graduation. Between them lay a small silver locket, identical to the one Sarah had worn the night she died, containing the same family photograph. Michael had purchased it years after her death, a tangible connection to what had been lost. He picked it up now, running his thumb across its surface, feeling the familiar weight in his palm. The journey from that July night in 1995 to the present had been long and often painful. There had been dead ends and disappointments, moments of despair and flashes of hope. But ultimately, there had been answers. And from those answers had come not just closure for his family but openings for others, pathways to truth that might otherwise have remained hidden. As night fell across Oregon, other families of cold case victims prepared for another day of waiting. Some had been seeking answers for years, others for decades. Many had watched the Collins case resolution with a mixture of joy for that family and renewed longing for similar closure in their own situations. What they couldn't yet know was which of their cases might be next, which stored evidence box contained the DNA that would lead to a killer, which family tree harbored a branch connecting to violence, which detective or scientist or genealogist would make the crucial connection that transformed mystery into resolution. But because of Sarah Collins, because of her family's persistence, because of advances in science, because of investigators who refused to let the case fade into history, more of these families would eventually find the answers they sought. More communities would witness justice delayed but ultimately delivered. More cold cases would yield their secrets to technologies that bridge the gap between past crimes and present capabilities. This was perhaps the most meaningful legacy of the Collins case, not just one family's journey from uncertainty to resolution, but a fundamental shift in how society viewed cold cases. What had once been considered permanently unsolvable was now recognized as potentially resolvable. The passage of time, once the ally of those who escaped justice, was increasingly becoming their enemy as science advanced and persistence paid off. In his Portland apartment, Jason Collins prepared for another day at the cold case unit, reviewing files of decades-old homicides with new eyes. In her university office, Emma finalized a lecture on the latest developments in forensic DNA analysis. And in his quiet home, Michael Collins drifted to sleep with the silver locket resting in his palm, his dreams filled not with the nightmare of loss but with the satisfied knowledge that his wife's case had helped change the landscape of criminal justice, had helped transform cold cases from abandoned mysteries into delayed but still achievable opportunities for truth. Across Oregon and beyond, the ripples from the Sarah Collins case continued to spread, touching lives and cases and communities in ways both seen and unseen. The diner murder that had once seemed destined to remain a permanent mystery had instead become a catalyst for resolution, not just for one family, but potentially for hundreds of others whose loved ones' killers remained unidentified, whose questions remained unanswered, whose journey toward justice continued. For them, the Collins case offered a powerful message: no matter how much time had passed, no matter how cold the trail had grown, the possibility of answers remained. Science advanced. Methods evolved. And truth, however deeply buried by time, had ways of eventually rising to the surface. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.